time for me, huh?
It is. Yep. It's time for you.
All right. We've got Dire Straits, Brothers in Arms, and in the opening montage you heard Money for Nothing, and now you're going to hear Walk of Life.
Dedication, devotion, turning on a nighttime into the day. Do the song about a sweet love and love. They do the song about the night. Then they do the walk of life. Yeah, they do the walk of life.
All right, Matt, what are the numbers on this one?
So Dire Straits' Brothers in Arms comes in at number 26 in 1980s on Best Ever Albums, number 3 in 1985, number 223 of all time. It is their highest rated album on Best Ever Albums, and they come in at number 124 of overall artist rankings on Best Ever Albums, and they are ranked on Rolling Stone's list, coming in at number 418.
All right. So Brothers in Arms is their fifth studio album. It was released May 19th, 1985. We've covered them twice previously with Love Over Gold and blanking on the name of the other album. Somebody can fill that in for me in a second. But the
Making Movies was the other album,
okay,
Josh.
Thank you. They were formed in 1977 in London by lead guitarist and vocalist Mark Knopfler, his brother David Knopfler, who is the rhythm guitarist, John Illsley on bass, and Pick Withers on drums. They all had different day jobs at the time when they formed the band, and Mark was actually an English teacher, and David was a social worker, and Illsley was at college. They were originally called the Cafe Racers, but the name Dire Straits was thought up by a roommate of Withers. And they got a record contract with Vertigo Records in 1977 after DJ Charlie Gillett played a demo of Sultans of Swing on BBC Radio. Their first self-titled album came out in February of 1978 in the UK and drew attention of Karen Berg at Warner Brothers in New York City. And then later that year, they went on tour opening for Talking Heads, which led to a contract with Warner Brothers and increased their exposure, especially in the US, Canada, New Zealand, and Australia. In 78, they had a US tour with Sultans of Swing, getting to 4 on the US charts and 8 on the UK charts. Bob Dylan actually saw them play in LA and invited Mark and Pick Withers to play on his album Slow Train Coming, one of the Bob Dylan albums we didn't cover in the 70s. In June of 1979, their second album, Communique, was released and was produced by Jerry Wexler and Barry Beckett, and continued their growth and exposure as a band. In 1980, they were nominated for 2 Grammys for Best New Artist and Best Vocal Performance by a Rock Duo or Group for the Sultans of Swing. Their third album, Making Movies, came out in October of 1980. And during recording, tensions between the brothers caused David Knopfler to leave the band over creative differences and pursue a solo career, and he never returned. This is a band that had a lot of lineup changes in its short time frame. Basically, just Knopfler and I believe John Illsley are the only 2 members that remained throughout the entire career. So in came guitarist Sid McGuinness and keyboardist Roy Batan from the E Street Band filled in on making movies, and after recording, keyboardist Alan Clark and guitarist Hal Lindes joined the band, or Hal Lind. Making Movies featured longer songs, as we touched on, and more complex arrangements, which became a hallmark of the band. And their song Solid Rock became a staple at live shows, as well as Tunnel of Love. And then Making Movies stayed on the UK charts for 5 years, which I thought was pretty interesting. Their fourth album, Love Over Gold, was released in September of 1982 and featured lengthy portions of Alan Clark's keyboard and guitar work. And the title of the album was taken from a sleeve of a Captain Beefheart album, which I thought was also interesting. Private Investigations, the song, gave the band its first top 5 hit in the UK. This was also the first album solely produced by Knopfler, and he also at this time wrote Private Dancer and gave it to Tina Turner for her album of the same name. Also during this time, Pick Withers left the band and was replaced by Terry Williams. And then interestingly, in January of 1983, they released a 4-song EP called Extended Dance Play. And there's different letters that are hyphenated and it all comes together as one word. So it's kind of weird looking. But it featured the hit single Twisting by the Pool. And they went on a 8-month tour, which culminated in a double live album titled Alchemy Live of their 2 ending concerts at the Hammersmith Odeon in London. During the 83 to 84 period, Knopfler wrote the score for a movie called Local Hero, and the final track is played before the end of every Newcastle United game. He's from Newcastle, specifically. He also produced Bob Dylan's Infidels album, which Alan Clark is featured on. And then they began recording Brothers in Arms at the end of 1984 in Montserrat, which is a British overseas territory in the Northern Antilles Islands in the Caribbean, for all you geo heads out there. I had to look it up because I did not know where it was. Before they got there, Knopfler... So this continues our tradition of British bands performing in weird British studios out in the middle of nowhere, probably in poorer conditions than they expect.
No Rolling Stones traveling studio, Josh?
Yeah. Before they got there, Knopfler already had all the songs written and the band had already rehearsed them, so they basically just had to record. They added a full-time second keyboardist to the band, whose name was Guy Fletcher, and then Hal Lindy's left the band early on, and guitarist Jack Sonny joined. So during the first month of recording the album, they found that their drummer was unsuitable for the sound, so they kicked out Terry Williams for the recording and brought in jazz drummer Omar Hakim, and they brought Williams back for the music videos in the world tour that followed. So he wasn't good enough for the album, apparently. Omar Hakim was the guy who basically created that drum intro opening to Money for Nothing also. During the recording of Money for Nothing song specifically, Knopfler was trying to go for a ZZ Top sound, he said, and the sound may have been enhanced by the happy accident of the mics being placed in kind of a haphazard way. They normally wouldn't be. They were probably left out the night before and weren't finished being set up, but one was pointing at the floor and another was offset from the speaker and another was somewhere else entirely, they didn't say. So they just ended up using that sound in the track, and that's what you hear on the album with no additional effects or mixing. The album was produced by Mark Knopfler and Neil Dorfsman. It was one of the first albums recorded on a Sony 24-track digital tape machine, so this is all digital recording at this time, when a lot of bands and artists were still using analog stuff. Released in 1985, Brothers in Arms entered the UK album charts at number 1 and spent a total of 228 weeks on the charts and sold over 4.3 million copies. It went on to become the best-selling album of 1985 in the UK. In the US, it peaked at number 1 on the Billboard 200 for 9 weeks, going multi-platinum and selling 9 million copies. This album and tour were insanely popular, guys. The Money for Nothing reached number 1 on the singles charts in the UK, in the US, and 4 in the UK. The other singles were So Far Away, Brothers in Arms, Walk of Life, and Your Latest Trick. Brothers in Arms is the first album certified 10 times platinum in the UK. It's the 8th best-selling album in UK chart history. It sold over 30 million copies worldwide. Money for Nothing was the first video to be played on MTV Europe when it launched August 1st, 1987. As Matt already knew, Sting was guest vocals on this track, and he has a co-writing credit as a result due to his melody of repeating I Want My MTV in the fade out, echoing the melody of Don't Stand So Close to Me, which I kind of hear but kind of don't in that. It won a Grammy for Best Rock Performance by a duo or group in 1986.
Well, I Want My MTV and Don't Stand So Close to Me, Josh, are basically the exact same thing. They're the same.
Yeah. No, you're saying I want rhyme.
My MTV.
Yeah, he sings like literally, and they even rhyme. Like it's pretty clear. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Got it. Also won Best Engineered Album, non-classical that year. Was nominated for Record of the Year and Song of the Year, losing both losing to We Are the World, which won that year at the Grammys.
Oh, damn.
Speaking of videos we should cover, if you just want to like call out all the different people that are on there, yeah. Mm-hmm. When I think of We Are the World, I always think of like Bruce Springsteen, and Bruce Springsteen is the one funny part, and then Bob Dylan like is the other funny part of that video. By the way, I'd like to point out. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
The guitar on the front of the cover of the album is Mark Knopfler's 1937 14-fret National Style O resonator. And it's kind of like a metallic guitar. You can read all about that kind of style.
It was a
guitar.
dobro. Looks like a dobro.
It is not. It's a specific type of guitar that was produced only in the late 30s and early 40s. Brothers in Arms. This is the other fun fact I found. Brothers in Arms was one of the first albums directed at the CD market, and was a full digital recording. It was
CD like SEEDY?
No, CD like compact disc. Sorry, I said it wrong.
Okay, no problem.
It was also released on vinyl and cassette, but it was the first album to sell over 1 million copies in the CD format, and it outsold the LP version. So CDs then became kind of the dominant, I think, rose to dominance in the audio sphere. The world tour for this album, they played 248 shows in over 100 different cities. They appeared on Live Aid during the tour, with Sting guest starring in their performance. And their tour ended in Sydney, Australia, where they hold the record for appearing 21 consecutive nights in a row. With over 900,000 tickets sold in Australia and New Zealand. It was the biggest tour in Australasian history until Ed Sheeran broke it in 2017, which I thought was very interesting. So I've got a postscript, because they really only did one other album, or one or two albums after this before they broke up. But what did you guys think of Brothers in Arms? This is kind of the epitome. We've been building to this album on our Dire Straits talk. And what did you think of this album?
Yeah, it's a mixed bag for me, I'd say. The first four songs are sort of omnipresent, and so it's like boom, 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 boom hits, and it's easy to understand what Dire Straits is by listening to those four songs, and maybe you throw in like Sultans of Swing and like Romeo and Juliet, right? And when you listen to those 6 songs, I feel like you will know what Dire Straits is from those 6 songs. It's not to minimize other stuff, but that's what they are. And so you're like, okay, I've got sort of a general idea. It's like Knopfler's guitar, and sort of there's a guitar tone that immediately is recognizable when you hear Dire Straits that's there. And this album, I think,
his voice too, I would say, is kind of bunch distinct. Sorry.
It's so funny that we cover this album the same time as we cover the Kate Bush album, because they're sort of structured the same way, where it's a lot of like pop songs at the beginning and then some experimental on the back end. And this one is different, and I'll save my thoughts for the Kate Bush album until later, but this one's sort of like you get these big hits at the beginning, and then the second part of the album becomes very atmospheric and fit a lot of space on these tracks, like One World and Brothers in Arms. I'll be honest, I found the second album is definitely like the vibes that are being put off, like, do you connect, right? And I don't know, I think it goes back to that clean production sound that there's just not a lot of grit for me, or just things like when I get taken into the vibes, right? Like I need a little bit more to bring me in. And I don't know, the second part of the album did not connect with me. That certainly does not minimize the fact that songs like So Far Away and Walk of Life and Your Latest Trick. My favorite song on this album is Your Latest Trick. I think it's kind of, along with Sultans of Swing, I feel like it's
interesting.
It's the best of what Dire Straits is. It's very romantic, is how I would describe that specific song, with the sax all over. It's almost adult contemporary, but because the guitar work is so tasty around it, you kind of get fooled into realizing that at its heart, this sort of feels, and I don't want this to come off the wrong way, but this kind of feels a little bit like boomery and a little bit adult contemporary to me, if that makes sense.
I wrote that down for Your Latest Trick, adult contemporary.
Adult, yeah, and I just think I don't know. Like, I kept waiting to be sucked into this album more, and I think in my head I'm like, oh, Dire Straits, you know, I like Dire Straits, but like when I then, now that we've done 3 albums, I actually think this is the weakest of the 3 that we listened to, which seems so weird to say about an album that has so many hits in it. But I don't know. I felt there was a piece missing for me, and the cleanness of the production, the sparseness kind of took me on a river, but the river didn't lead anywhere, and I think I kept waiting for it to lead me somewhere. And I think that was a little bit of the challenge for me. And I think especially after I get through Your Latest Trick and I'm like, oh, this is going to be like almost like a greatest hits album, right? It's kind of like we joked about that Cars album, right? It's like, okay, I know all these songs and so many of them are here. But then after Your Latest Trick, I knew Why Worry, I think, a little bit, but I don't think it's nearly as strong a song as it could have been. The other thing I think this album suffered from a little bit is some of the tracks went too long. And I felt they would have been better as 4 or 5 minute compositions than they would be as 8-minute compositions. And if I'm going to hear Dire Straits go 8 minutes, I really want Mark Knopfler to kind of like riff on the blues guitar and just do virtuoso guitar. You know, in the same way that if, you know, you listen to somebody like the Allman Brothers or somebody, like that's kind of what you're waiting, you know, the last 4 minutes to hear is the guitar part. But I never felt the guitar chops that, obviously Mark Knopfler is an incredible guitar player, but it didn't seem to me to warrant 7 minutes or 8 minutes on some of these songs. You know, a song like Money for Nothing, sure, because it's kind of an epic. Sure, we can stay around for that. But Why Worry, Brothers in Arms, I felt those were a little bit too long. So I have to say, I was going to say thumbs in the middle, but I actually think I might go a little bit thumbs down on this one. I would say it's one of the more disappointing albums for me of the 80s so far.
Yeah.
Yeah, I agree with some of what you said. I disagree with other things that you said. I would say
Fair
that
enough.
it's very interesting how this does begin, because it's got the 1, 2, 3 in particular. 4 to a lesser extent. I did know that song, but I don't remember that being as big as as omnipresent as the other 3. But those were just staples of, you know, of the mid 80s. You know, Walk of Life was I remember that's the biggest pop song on here. You know, it's 4 minutes. It's very easy to get into. It's got that 80s groove, but it's just
organ melody is like
it's a very
it's also on one of those NFL Films videos. Remember that they used to on ESPN all the time? It's on one of those, so I always associate it with that for some reason, which is the most 80s videos ever.
Yeah, that's a great track. And Money for Nothing, I mean, it is an epic song. I mean, that guitar sound, that guitar riff that he's playing is fantastic. It's so great. And I always love Mark Knopfler because you see him play. He always plays with his thumb. He never plays with like a guitar pick. He just does that plucking with his thumb in that weird position that he's got his hand. And it's so great. I mean, that is just such a great song. I didn't put 2 and 2 together on that Sting. It's the same thing as Don't Stand So Close to Me, but it's absolutely the same thing. So that was a cool fact. And I love the way that ends with you know, look at that. I want my, and going back and forth like the I Want My MTV thing. Like, it's just that's a great song. So it just starts off so strong, and then it does like, adult contemporary is an excellent way of putting it. That's what I was thinking. But to me, it's good adult contemporary. You know, I'm kind of thinking about this is the sound of Dire Straits losing some of their edge. It's the sound of them aging, right? We talked this about last week with the essential question about, you know, artists, what happens when they age. And, you know, you can definitely hear like a little bit more of a more introspective, mature Mark Knopfler coming through with some of these songs. And I don't necessarily think that that's a bad thing, but it definitely, you know, particularly from Your Latest Trick through Right Across the River, I mean, you're just getting that 6.5 minutes, 8.5 minutes, 7 minutes long. I mean, those are 3 really long songs.
Yeah.
And maybe they overstay their welcome a little bit. Like, I don't know if Why Worry needs to be 8.5 minutes. It's a very pretty song.
It
like,
doesn't.
It's okay. So there you go, John. Yeah. I mean, it's a very pretty song. It's nice, right? You know, and it is, but it does kind of, to me, get a little bit into the background music type
Is
thing
it
where
weird
it's just
to
kind
you
of there.
Is it weird to you that this album sold so many copies?
Yes. It's kind of
I mean,
incredible.
because Money for Nothing and Walk of Life were huge freaking songs,
I
and
guess
the video
people-
catapulted it.
Yeah.
I mean, keep in mind, people would buy albums just off the strength of one or two
But
songs.
like Sultans of Swing was a huge song, right? And so like you'd think, and that album seemed to me to be a little bit more consistent. Like if like a
it
jillion
didn't have the
people were gonna buy it.
MTV video. Like the,
Is that-
the-
okay.
I think the video
Yeah.
had a big thing to do with it for sure.
But this is
And-
like, this is not like who I imagine was watching MTV, who's like buying
No.
this album.
I could see people buying this album and being disappointed.
Okay.
Or only
no
like
one
listening to
talks
the
about
first half.
retrospective. 30 million people bought it, and everyone was disappointed.
I mean, that's
I mean, maybe
harsh,
they
but, you
weren't.
know,
I don't want to say they,
No, I
they
don't think-
were.
I don't think that's true.
It just seems. I just think of an album that I think of so much as having an MTV video, right?
Mm-hmm.
And knowing what some of the like we covered 2 of their first 4 albums, which I felt like would have been much more the album that would have been the big. Well, certainly their first album, Moving Pictures, I felt like would have been, but. I think this one was like, boy, this is a really interesting album because it's not at all what I would have expected to
Right.
be along with Money for Nothing, you know?
I think
Yeah.
that people definitely were. I think that there were probably plenty of people that were surprised, you know. But like, and your latest trick is kind of like like the saxophone, like the jazzy bossa nova. I don't know, kind of, you know, that's a different sound. Right Across the River's kind of like world music. It's like pan flutes and
Reggae influence.
Yeah, stuff like that. I thought the man's too strong. I thought that was that's got a little Americana vibe to it. They kind of the last couple that song kind of picks up a little bit. One World gets a little bit more into a funk kind of a thing, like a funky bass kind of line. So they're really drawing on a lot of different genres here. And I think, I mean, to me, my favorite song here, "Brothers in Arms," is a fantastic song. I love that song so much. It's and the way that it's a very reserved, that he holds back. It's very subdued. But I just love that chord progression, that melody of the chorus. I love the guitar solo. I think it's just got this dramatic kind of melancholy. I think it's about like war. It's like a about wars and just brothers together and in arms as they're fighting the war and stuff. And I love the sonic landscape that song has. And I think that's that might be my favorite song of the album actually. But I think that was the single as well. So I think it ends pretty well. The last 3 songs pretty well. But yeah, I would agree that I was a little bit left. I was expecting more. It probably is overall my least favorite of the 3 that we've covered. I think that there's just more filler on here, and it's fine. But it's not. I agree. It's kind of like this was the one that sold a bunch, but it also makes sense because I think it just because of those big songs that they had towards the beginning. So it's not enough for me to go thumbs in the middle because I think that there's plenty of stuff on here that's really great, but it does that middle part in there. It does kind of lose me a little bit, and it is like that adult. It's that older, introspective voice that's kind of coming through in that sound, and adult contemporary in and of itself isn't bad necessarily. So, but I think this is pretty good for that as far as I'm concerned, But yeah, it's probably my least favorite of the 3 that we've covered. But having that said, I would still say thumbs up because there's plenty of good stuff on here for me.
I think it's an interesting run too because we didn't cover the I said earlier the debut, but actually
The 70s stuff we didn't
Making
do anything.
Movies was it? Dire Straits, like self-titled, was the first, and that one's got Sultans of Swing, and then other songs that are well regarded, but it's there. So I'd be curious to hear that one. I think the second album, Communique.
Yeah.
Doesn't have anything I recognize, and based on the plays overall, might not be considered. It looks like one of their stronger albums, or at least their popular albums. I think Making Movies is pretty clearly, in my opinion, their best album. And having listened to it, I felt that way. And then, of course, the one Love Over Gold was an interesting one because it's basically like a prog album in some ways.
I
So
like
it's
that
all
one,
over
yeah.
the place. I know Matt loves Telegraph Road a lot, and Josh and I were a little bit less in love with it. But at least the long songs kind of serve, okay, Dire Straits going in a different direction. I think I didn't realize that Dire Straits went in that direction, away from lean blues-based songs as long as they did. Yeah.
Yeah, I found this album disappointing, and it kind of made me reevaluate the entire band as a result.
Oh, damn.
And my
I would say I had a similar experience, Josh, to be honest.
Thinking about the previous albums, I guess, I was kind of not having heard Making Movies before and was kind of really impressed by that. And knowing how good Mark Knopfler was as a guitarist, I was expecting this album to be kind of a culmination of everything I liked about the band. And they kind of veered away from that, of the promise that I thought they had, or the things I liked about it. And it seemed like Knopfler does not like the same things I like in his band, or what he wants to pursue is not what I am interested in.
He kind of teased us with Less Boys, right, as the last song on Making Movies, and then after that it sort of all went downhill, like it's really like that's the last track on this great album, and then you get this prog album, and then you get this, right?
Yeah. So. And it's like he kind of rejects wanting to be a guitar virtuoso in the way that I want him to be. I want him to be like Slash or something in terms of like making these incredible guitar, or like Eddie Van Halen
or Stevie Ray Vaughan, even like if you go down that lane,
right.
Blues-based guitar virtuoso.
He doesn't. It seems like based on this album and Love Over Gold, he's much more interested in kind of like jamming out and exploring the space and like using other influences, like you said, Matt. The whole back half of this album is like reggae inspired or country blues inspired or
potpourri.
Yeah, and that's kind of not what I wanted. It's almost unfair how like top loaded this is with all the hits, and then the back half is like I don't know why they constructed the album this way. I feel like they would spread the hits out. Maybe it seems like they knew the hits were going to be hits, and they put those up front when I feel like they should have spread them out.
I think a lot of albums around this time did that. It's not like an abnormal thing to put like the main songs up front.
Yeah. I was really underwhelmed by everything after Walk of Life. I didn't really like Your Latest Trick. I didn't really like the rest of the album, and it kind of annoyed me that they went on for so long, in the way that John said, where he's not really even playing guitar that much. It's like he's letting notes hang and not doing any sort of wizardry. And it just kind of felt like a lost opportunity for me. And I felt like this whole album, and as a result, this whole band was kind of like a lost opportunity.
It almost felt like you're listening to like an Elton John album, and he just suddenly stopped playing the piano and started like going on to the marimbas and like the xylophone and stuff, like, and you're just like, why are you like, what happened to the piano, which is kind of a little bit of what I wanted to be moored to, and at times it was almost like,
guitar.
Where's the guitar?
It kind of fades out too, because like Your Latest Trick, I just think of the sax and like how that takes over, and then other times there's like keyboards that just take over, and that's not why I want to listen to this band. And that's clearly not what he's interested in as the lead of the band. So I don't know, like I think Making Movies was by far my favorite album of the ones we've listened to. I wonder if the earlier, that self-titled, like John said, was more promising as well. But yeah, I'm also kind of confused at how this band was so popular and like one of the biggest bands of the 80s arguably, and I think there's an interesting quote later on, which I'll read, but it seems like they were kind of almost like a flash in the pan in a sort of way, or captured, to paraphrase that quote, they almost like captured the zeitgeist at a point, and then it like just faded away.
Did it kind of feel to you like, I think I never processed Dire Straits as a band that tracked so much with the baby boomers, but like I feel like the more I listen to them, the more it's sort of like the boomers moving from like 78 to like 1985 was sort of the vibe I got. Whereas like in the 78, it's like, okay, I want like some good guitar rock, but it's kind of tame because I no longer really want to go wild anymore, but it's still got a little bit blues bass and spicy enough. And like by 1985, it's like full on adult contemporary mixed with like, even Walk of Life has a lot of organ, and stuff in it. And I've never really been super enamored with that song. And I was like, wow, I like you, I kind of was like, I probably would have, before we covered Dire Straits, said that I thought they were like a really strong band, but I kind of had my faith shaken a little bit in that take.
Yeah.
Well, okay. I think first of
jump
all, the
in, Matt.
guitar, I think the guitar, yeah, he's not rocking out like he has in the past, right? Or like he's able to. But part of what, I don't think you always need to do that to be a great guitarist. And I think that that's kind of one of the cool things with what he's doing here. You know, I like the guitar sound. It's not a virtuoso thing. He's got a great guitar tone. He's got there is space, but what he's doing when he's playing the notes, I mean, it's a very calculated, kind of deliberate, you know, mood and vibe that he's going for. And it sounds, I think it sounds great. Now, the keyboards do kind of drown out some of that. I mean, there is like an organ solo kind of towards the end of Brothers in Arms, but like, it's still there. There's elements that are still there, and I think that that's one of the interesting things that thing that I like the most about this is that when it is reserved and when it is held back, it's still. I just go to Brothers in Arms. I mean, that's still, to me, that's a super powerful song. You know, and it's just
what is it that interests you about that? Because to me, I found that song extremely boring. I see why you say that, because there's not
languid is the word that comes to mind.
Yeah, and I see that, but there's something about the way that he does the way that the chorus goes. It's a very simple thing. It doesn't have to be complex, like the opposite of like a Marillion kind of like bombastic. Yeah. It's a very subtle thing, but I just think it sounds so great. I think it's just really pretty. I think and I love the sound of the guitar on it. And I love the mood and the soundscape that it portrays.
It sounds a little like a Springsteen song, so I guess maybe that's why I think it. You know, I can see a little bit. It has elements of that, his voice and stuff, but yeah, I mean, I don't know. It's just nothing about it really hooked me. It didn't create like an interesting landscape for me. And if you're gonna use space, like I guess I just need it to be more the parts. I need to like be drawn in from time to time and just sort of floated over me.
Yeah, those parts where they're jamming don't really build to anything either. It's like not. You know, kind of prog kind of goes up and down and stuff, and that doesn't really. It just kind of like tapers off and fades out into the sunset on these songs.
It's almost like jam rock.
Yeah,
like that's why I struggle with jam rock sometimes, because it's like it feels like it's occupying the same space for a long amount of time, and I'm waiting for something else. And if you're not going to give me a chorus, right, and deconstruct it, like I at least need it to be. You know, you compare it to like the 7-minute stuff we're hearing from like Metallica, right? And it's like I like what they do with their 7 minutes a lot more. Yeah, you know, in terms
and it's a totally different way of just approaching a song, you know. And I'm not saying, and I do agree with you guys that this is like overall this album, I'd rather probably listen to some their other stuff. But I'd also say like, so they got a couple of clunkers on here that you're not really as into. That doesn't take away from the stuff that they did already, you know, or what they were capable of doing. I mean. For this to be their highest ranked album on Best Ever Albums, I probably wouldn't agree with that. I think that I would probably put a couple other ahead of it. But, you know, and I wanted this to be better too. But I also think that like the idea that the guitar, in order to be great, needs to have this like huge like epic solo. I think it can be like this as well, and still be interesting and I
think I need like Mark Knopfler though to give me more of that. Like he can do different things, but I think like the key of what. It's like if Eddie Van Halen stopped playing stuff that sounded like Eddie. Well, he did. It was called Van Hagar, and I didn't like that as much either, right? Some people did, you know. But I'll definitively say that. Yeah, I felt like part of what happened was that Eddie Van Halen stopped playing the guitar and started playing the keyboards and the synth more. And it worked on 1984, but diminishing returns, and that's kind of how I felt about this album. It was a little bit diminishing returns. And I'm all for artists being able to explore their own stuff. So I was happy, and I'm happy they made a shit ton of money too. But I do think it came at the expense of a little bit of my specific taste. And I don't think it was like I needed him to rewrite the songs I like you know, what was it, Espresso Love, which I really liked and stuff like that. I didn't have to keep writing that, but I would have liked him to have, you know, had a couple more tracks that explored some of that same blues-based space.
Had a little bit more pop. Yeah. No, I hear you. I
there's
agree
pop
with that
all
too.
over this album. Yeah, but like,
no, I meant pop. I meant pop like energy. You know, like just a little bit more of a zing. You know, and I don't disagree. I was kind of defending a little bit of the, you know, kind of the sound that they were going for.
I think that's fair, Matt. I think that's a good point. I'm sure there's other bands that we've talked about that I can't think of right now where they're doing that, and I did like it. But
I feel like there's bands that are more restrained with the guitar where I like it. I just think that the difference, Matt, is that it's not so much that the guitar is restrained that I'm not liking. It's just that I am not interested by what the restraint is giving me in the way that I'm trying to think of an album that's more space oriented. That like the early Pink Floyd, which I thought I was going to hate, actually I liked a lot more, and there's plenty of space in that. So even the stuff I don't love from Pink Floyd, I respect a lot because of I get what they're going for, even if I don't always love it. Maybe that's the example.
Yeah.
A little bit like what David Gilmour does and stuff, but okay.
Yep.
Okay.
So,
just to finish off their bio, they came back to Knopfler spent 87 pursuing solo work, and then they came back together in June of 88 for Nelson Mandela's birthday tribute at Wembley Stadium, and then in September of 88 Knopfler announced that Dire Straits is breaking up due to stress on the band, the gigantic tour they just did, and Knopfler wanting to do more solo work. In early 91 they reunited with a new lineup and released their 6th album, On Every Street, in September of 91, which was their final studio release. This accompanied by a huge world tour with 300 shows for 7.1 million people. The album and tour were not as successful critically or commercially, but and as a result, Dire Straits broke up for good. In a GQ article, Bill Flanagan said, quote, "The subsequent world tour lasted nearly 2 years, made mountains of money, and drove Dire Straits into the ground. And when the tour was over, both Knopfler's marriage and the band were gone," unquote. Manager Ed Bicknell said, quote, "The last tour was utter misery. Whatever the zeitgeist was that we had been part of, it had passed," quote, unquote. Their final album was live at the BBC and was a contractual obligation. Knopfler has shown no interest in reuniting, saying, "I would only do that for charity. I'm glad I've experienced it all. I had a lot of fun with it, but I like things the way they are." In 2018, they were inducted to the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame. Knopfler did not appear at the ceremony, and the Hall of Fame recognized John Illsley, David and Mark Knopfler, Pick Withers, Alan Clark, and Guy Fletcher as significant members of the band, and only Clark, Fletcher, and Illsley turned up for the ceremony. They are still not reunited, no plans to. Dire Straits is one of the most popular British rock bands, as well as one of the world's most commercially successful artists, with total worldwide album sales of more than 120 million. So that is...
He's got a little me in him that, like, when it's done, it's done.
Yeah.
It's a lot of records.
Yeah. So they sold a lot of records at a time when album sales could keep you alive for the rest of your life. But, yep, that's it for Dire Straits.